All right, well, greetings, everyone. Welcome back to the Shakedown. I'm your host, Warden Dawson. And as promised on the last episode, continuing with Dr. Steve Sampson. If you're just picking up on this, go back and watch the other one. But we're talking about conflict management. Dr. Sampson has written a book, and there will be some training coming out of that in the next year or so through NIJO. But yes, want to present some principles out of the book just to kind of give you some idea of what it's about. But more importantly, give you some thoughts and some tips about how you can resolve conflict today before you get to the training, and help us as corrections professionals. How do we bring that intensity level down? Or avoid the intensity level ahead of time. And we talked about last time, Dr. Sampson, some causes of conflict, and I want to continue in that line of thought and talk about some more causes or facts about conflict. So if we want to pick up where we left off, if you will, and keep going with, what are some other causes that we see?
A big one is personality traits.
Right.
We are a human being. We have a thing called a personality, and a personality is everything about you. It's how you view things, how you manage your feelings, how you perceive reality. And two personality traits that are very critical to conflict management is open-mindedness and agreeableness.
Okay.
And I run psych tests for officers in Georgia, and both corrections and law enforcement. And I give them a personality test.
Okay.
And I try to measure the agreeableness of an officer who wants to be someone, and what I call their open-mindedness.
Okay.
Now, why does that matter? Well, the opposite of being open-minded is being closed-minded.
Makes sense.
And the opposite of agreeable is to be disagreeable. Well, people who are closed-minded in their personality, or to some degree, basically are not agreeable, tend to get more conflict.
Sure.
And just because they find it difficult when people disagree with them, that's called.
Right.
And they don't like listening to things they're not familiar with, called open-mindedness.
Okay.
And so consequently, that's a big source of conflict. Here's a good example of that. Let's say I would say to somebody, you should start eating insects.
Okay.
And they go like, that's disgusting. But then I say to you, well, of the 6 billion people on Earth, 2 billion eat insects. No, they don't. Yes, they do. That's a fact. Now, that doesn't mean you need to eat insects. I'm just telling you, if those 2 billion people are eating them, then evidently they ain't dying.
Right.
So you should be open-minded.
And right. Okay.
Okay. Now, I can put some chocolate on it if it makes you feel better. But when I make that point, they feel that's disgusting. Well, that's because they think the way they think, and it's closed-minded.
Right.
An inside joke about that: entomologists who study insects think we should eat them, because they're going to eat us before we eat them if we don't get them under control.
Survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest. Eating all this raw meat and animal stuff, and putting cows on there who gaslight in the environment because of their poos in the pasture. I don't know if that's true, but that's something about it, is that all these animal waste things are polluting our environment. I don't know if that's true or not. But the bottom line is a cow versus a cockroach. The bottom line is which is safer. So people aren't very open-minded about
the cockroach. Yeah, exactly.
But the reality of it is, yeah, people do eat insects. I can tell you the countries it takes place in, and you'd be shocked. Now, I'm not suggesting you eat insects. That's not my point. But I think you've got to be open-minded enough to realize, well, okay, it's a possibility.
Sure.
So if someone comes to you with something you disagree with, and because you're not open-minded, well, yeah, you're going to have conflict. You're going to start arguing with them, they're wrong and you're right, and that's not a good thing. That doesn't mean you have to accept the behavior.
Right.
You just have to understand that, well, other people do it and they seem to be okay.
Yes.
You know, here's a good example of that. A friend of mine was a captain in Vietnam.
Okay.
And he was over there, and he was with a colonel from a Vietnamese army. And it was a delicacy at breakfast. And what it had to do with eggs. Okay. Well, over there, they let the little chick be in the yolk before you eat it.
Interesting.
And so when he saw this egg, and there's this little chick embryo in there, and the colonel says to eat it, he got disgusted, but he was afraid not to eat it because it would offend this Vietnamese colonel, and he ate it, but he was because this little embryo was inside the yolk. It wasn't just a yolk.
Right.
And he thought he was eating a live embryo. And so those are examples of that. You went into that, and he was caught. He didn't know what to do. He told us the story. It's an interesting one. But he said he had to be open-minded for the sake
Sure.
of peace and getting along. Because the general thought it was like really special. I'm doing this for you.
Right.
Or the colonel, I should say.
Yes.
So that's an example of it.
Okay.
All right. I'm not suggesting you have to eat, the embryo inside an egg. The yolk is fine.
Right.
But you're offended because it just doesn't fit in your mindset.
Sure.
All right, and that's why we have problems like that. You don't have to agree to something, but you be open-minded enough that other people do it, and it doesn't make them bad.
Right. It's
Makes
different,
sense?
not wrong.
It's just different and not wrong. And
Okay.
boy, if you can't do that, you're in big conflict.
Right. Yes.
So if he didn't eat it, he might have got shot. No, he wouldn't have got shot. No, I don't think so. I think it would have been accepted.
Right.
Okay, but that's an example of it. I mean, it's kind of like marriage and everything else in life. If you're not open-minded about the possibilities that marriage is not perfect, and you're not agreeable with your spouse because they don't do things the way you do and agree with you, then you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
And you can be agreeable and you can be open-minded. It doesn't mean you have to say it's okay or not okay. You just realize that's the way other people think and act.
Right. Okay.
All right? Another one that's a huge problem is when we attach feelings to facts. And what does that mean? Well, human beings, have facts in their head, and if those facts are in their head for a long time, they attach their emotions to them. So if I come along with an opposing set of facts to your facts, you're going to get very upset because the emotions you've attached to those
Right.
facts. They call that confirmation bias in psychology. You have to confirm your bias.
Sure.
Today's political world, you see a lot of that going on. You'll see people getting really upset if I come along with some facts that don't support your political position on something, and vice versa. And so you're going to see people even making death threats against people who don't agree with them.
Right.
And that's when you attach emotions to your facts.
Yes.
So the bottom line is when I come up with facts that oppose your facts, you get highly upset. And consequently, and you see that in religious issues, political issues, even cultural
Sure.
differences.
Sure.
And a very funny thing is the gentleman who first called it, he didn't call it confirmation bias. It was called cognitive dissonance. He'd been around psychology 50 years, and the guy's deceased. His name was Fessinger. And cognitive dissonance means cognitive dissonance means conflict.
Okay.
What causes mental conflict? And he did some funny experiments. One of the funniest things he ever did, Fessinger, he had people walking down the street, and there was a movie theater, and the entrances on both sides. They didn't know that.
Okay.
And so he'd tell people on one side of the street, I got this movie, watch it for 30 minutes. We're going to give you a free Coke and popcorn.
Okay.
And all you have to do is evaluate it for us.
Okay.
On the other side of the entrance, which everybody's talking, people walking down the street, says, listen, if you're going to watch this movie, we'll give you $25, popcorn and a Coke, evaluate this movie. Well, the people get in, they realize they come from different parts of the theater, and they're sitting next to each other, and they come to find out, hey, that guy's getting $25. I'm getting $5. But you're told you're not going to get anything unless you watch it and you vet. Well, the movie was horrible. Black and white, sound kept going on and off, made no sense, no theme.
Right.
You had to sit there for 30 minutes.
Right.
And you had to go up the entrance you came in to collect your $5 or $25. Well, the question was, they asked people who enjoyed the movie the most. Well, a funny thing happened in that. A lot of the people who got only $5 said the movie was fine. And the reason Fessinger said that is they couldn't deal with the fact that they'd been duped.
Right.
They had to confirm their bias that they went wrong.
Yes. Yes.
See, the dissonance caused by them being stupid, they went stupid. They got
Right.
conned. They said, I'm not conned.
Yes. Yes.
And you watch people today, for example, who get duped on fraud on computers, like romance fraud, which is a big problem right now. People who are very lonely, and they have these people who get involved with people online. They think there's somebody who actually cares about them.
Right.
And it's called romance fraud. They're never going to admit it once they get duped.
Once they figure out that
It's
the
too
game is
embarrassing
up.
to them.
I
So
gotcha.
they have to confirm the bias that they weren't duped, and so they don't report it to the police. Because if you think you allow yourself to be a victim, you can't say that to yourself.
Right.
So what you do have to confirm your bias, that I'm not dumb. These facts that I got, I wasn't fraudulently manipulated in doing it. They'll deny it.
Right. Which means that you haven't solved anything. It's just going to keep going.
It's going to keep going.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
It does.
Another variable involved in conflict is called self-justification.
Yes.
What that is when you justify things you've done wrong. In biblical terms, basically, they used to call it know thyself, which means to see your flaws, not just see your positives. And what human beings have a tendency to do is to self-justify their mistakes rather than own them.
It's okay because I did it, and here's why.
That's right. And so they justify it. And if other people are affected by your self-justifications, well, there's going to be conflict.
Sure.
Let's just say you're married and your spouse, partner sees you do things that are very offensive to them, and you don't like it. And they call you on it. Well, are you going to go in denial? By the way, that's not a river in the Amazon. It's denial. It's a bigger problem.
Right.
It's called psychological denial.
Yes.
And as a psychologist, I used to come in my hospital and they would be in big denial. I can't help them.
Right.
Because they're going to self-justify their flaws, their mistakes. And that's a huge cause of conflict.
Sure.
And in my training in psychology, I was told I can't do that. And so as a doctoral student, we're talking 76 to 81, my mentors would say to me, if I went in and I was complaining, say, about something going wrong in my life, they'd say, look in the mirror. And they'd say, that's where it starts. And I'd have to go home and reflect on, okay, what am I doing to contribute to this problem?
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean the other person doesn't do things wrong. It's just that self-justification is a huge problem in conflict.
Sure.
Because if you don't see the things you do wrong, you're in constant conflict.
Right. Right. And if I'm not looking for a solution to the point that even if the solution is me,
That's right.
if I'm not willing to do that, then I'm not really looking for a solution.
Correct. A big problem with that, too, is power. In a book I wrote a while back called Leaders Without Titles, one of the things I talk about is how power self-justifies. And the reason that happens is people in power, and especially a lot of power, people around them placate them.
Right.
They tell them what they want to hear.
Sure.
They don't confront them on their flaws, and they keep self-justifying the things they do even though they're wrong. And if you're going to be in a leadership role, an authority role, especially in our line of work, you better be careful.
Right.
Because what you're going to start doing is think what you're doing is okay. In reality, it's not, because people keep telling you it's okay, even though they know better.
Right. Right.
So you get a lot of passive, aggressive, negative behavior in your subordinates who realize that, don't dare tell you, and you just keep justifying things you do wrong because you don't even know you're doing them wrong.
Right. You ask them, hey, is this working? Oh, of course it's working.
Yeah, of course. They're going to tell you you're wonderful, you're beautiful, you're handsome, you're a perfect human being.
Right.
And that's why power is dangerous. And in this business, corrections and law enforcement, authority figures and have a tendency to sometimes think if someone challenges their authority, they ain't going to hear it.
Regardless of the reason.
Regardless of the reason. And so you're going to have conflict. And it's a huge problem. Another factor involved in it is what we call ideology. Ideology is the science of ideas.
Okay.
And in the world we live in, there are three basic ideologies. There's political ideologies, there's religious ideologies, and there's cultural ideologies.
Okay.
Religious ideologies basically are religious beliefs. There are 7 major religions on the earth, 7 major ones. Most people only know about theirs. They don't know about the others.
Right.
I always say to people, have you ever heard of the Encyclopedia of Religion? They go, what? What is that? I say, well, that's what, ever know what encyclopedia is? Yeah. Ever go to encyclopedia? Yeah. Why do you go to encyclopedia? Well, to learn about things. The Encyclopedia of Religion has been around a long time. And what it does is it goes through various religions and their belief systems. I've been in classrooms and I'll say to people, ever heard of it? And they don't even raise their hand. Never heard of it. So they make assumptions that other religions are flawed and mine's not.
Right. Right.
I was an FBI think tank 20 years ago, and at the time, and I've been fortunate to be in it. There were 8 of us, and I was invited as a psychologist. And what the FBI was concerned 20 years ago about was 2 things: holy wars. Here we are.
Yeah.
And they also want to look at what they call a futurist. So when our job was to write a job description for how this person should operate.
Okay.
The 8 of us had to give input, and I was a historian in there, a sociologist, a criminologist, a psychiatrist, and our job was to take this data and put together about creating a futurist position for the FBI to predict the future, and a conflict resolution person.
Okay.
And the thought was that there's going to be holy wars. Here we are.
Right.
Here we are.
Yeah.
And that's why I say to people, look, don't assume that other religions are flawed and yours is not. But a big problem people make is this. They'll see someone from a different religion do something wrong, and they generalize it. They apply it to the whole religion.
Yes.
So if a Christian does something wrong, then all Christians are this way. A Catholic does something wrong, then all Catholics are that way. A Muslim does something wrong, they're all that way. Well, if you read the Encyclopedia of Religion, you realize those religions aren't telling people to do that.
Right.
It's a human decision, individual decision, or a group decision, a faction
Sure.
in that group, and claims they are with this ideology, and so you would generalize, well, everybody in that religion is a bad human being. No, that's not true.
Right. Right.
And we generalize. It causes conflict.
Right. Because you generalize about me. If I'm one of those, I'm not like that.
I'm not like that.
That's him.
Yeah, that's him.
Yes.
But you do that. It's just human nature. You generalize. Another thing we do is in politics, the same thing.
Sure.
There are 4 major political ideologies in the world. There's a democracy, there's a monarchy, there's an authoritarian, and then there's totalitarian. You live in a democracy.
Right.
And democracies are relatively new. Rudolf Rummel's research, spelled Rummel, is an historian. He analyzed wars starting in 1817,
Okay.
and he had 371 wars he looked at. And he only put ones in there that had over 1,000 deaths. Other than that, he didn't call it a war.
Okay.
Rummel found an interesting thing. He found there's never been a war between 2 democracies in the history of the world. There's only been wars between democracies and the other types of regimes.
And other kinds.
See? Now, monarchies, Great Britain's a monarchy. You have a king, a queen, and they don't tend to get in wars either unless they're attacked.
Okay.
But democracies are least likely to. But totalitarian regimes and authoritarian regimes get in wars all the time. And democracies get in wars with them.
Right.
Which we're seeing today. Okay, so a lot of times political ideologies have to, well, democracies are messy.
Right.
They allow for civil rights, human rights. Everybody matters in a democracy.
Right.
In a totalitarian regime, the only thing that matters is the person in charge.
Yes. 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 And what
See?
they want. Right.
They what they want, you see. Now, monarchies, yeah, they do. I mean, king and queen, all that matter, and a prime minister, but there are still our human rights. Well, it appears that you're in, for example, in a correctional environment. You take a democratic approach to manage inmates, or you take a totalitarian approach to manage inmates.
Oh, absolutely not a demo. There's no voting.
No voting, and so you're going to have more conflict.
Right. Yes.
And part of my goal in getting this training out is I'm not telling you to create a democracy in a prison, but I think you have to understand they're human beings too.
Sure.
And what you got to realize is if you don't attend to the unique individuality like we do in democracies, you're going to have more conflict.
Makes
You're going
sense.
to change the way you kind of do things somewhat.
Right.
All right? A third is cultural.
Sure.
And culture basically is norms, like dress, what you eat, laws, customs, and you give it other cultures, and they have different customs and different rules about how you do things. One of the police problems I deal with in Georgia is called Doraville. It's a multicultural environment, and that police department has constant issues because when you go to a household of a certain cultural group, and you're a law enforcement person in uniform, you got to realize the way you act is based on how that culture acts too. So if you speak to the woman first in certain cultures, you're in trouble.
Right.
Conflict's coming.
Right.
You're supposed to speak to the male.
I got you. Yes.
And if that don't happen, there's a fight. So they don't understand that. They go in there thinking, why are they upset with me? And if there's a language barrier, it's a huge problem.
Sure. Sure.
So you got cultural conflicts because of that. And that police department has had to learn. It's changed a lot since then. We have another one called Clarkston, which I also have as a client. It's become the cultural melting pot.
I got you.
And it's the most diverse PD I've ever seen in my life. When I screen their officers, I got people from all over the world's offices in that culture. And it's interesting to watch. And a lot of people are drawn to that police department from different cultures. And that chief's unique because they tend to want to draw people from different cultural beliefs to be, but they can speak English and all that.
Sure.
But they come from a culture that is in that community that has that cultural variable
Right.
to cut down conflict. All right. The last thing is this. It's called the Golden Rule. Been around a long time. John Locke. And the Golden Rule is what you think it is. It basically means treat others as you would like to be treated. That's gone away. We used to call it empathy.
Right.
Or sympathy, but empathy and sympathy are two different concepts to me. They mean kind of the same, but the Golden Rule is based on empathy.
Right.
You try to understand why a person acts a certain way by trying to put yourself in their position.
Sure.
You also want to say, well, how would I feel? What would I be thinking if I were that person in that set of circumstances? A lot of times you don't do that like we should. Here's a good example. I'm in a company that screens officers, and one of the things we do interviews for a reason. So we give a test, and the test measures mental stability. We do the interview to find out, is there anything going on in that person's life at that time that affects the test?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, for example, if you drink 4 cups of coffee, you go get what do you call it, a blood pressure read,
Right.
it's going to be off the charts.
Right.
Does it mean you have high blood pressure? Yes and no.
Right.
Well, a lot of times people have personal problems in their life. And this one officer came one day, about 2 years ago. I could tell by his face in the interview something was wrong. He's going to take a test. So I say to him, are you okay? And he said, well, yes, sir. I said, well, he's a gentleman about in his mid-30s. And I said, is something wrong? He said, well, my wife died of brain cancer 2 months ago.
Oh, my goodness.
I said, oh, he said, I have 4 children, 4 sons. I'm a single dad now. And I said, okay. I don't want to get any more about the details because I don't want to talk more about the situation. But he had been a police officer before for 13 years. He's coming back to this police department after being away for 6 years. And he's not going to pass the test.
Right.
So I decided, okay, I got to have some empathy. I got to have some golden rule here. So in the mental status, he came back as depressed.
Sure.
And so what I did, I called the chief up. I've known him for a while, and I said, Jim, this is the doc. He said, yeah. I said, you have an applicant right now. Unfortunately, he's probably not going to do well on the mental part of the test. His personality is going to be fine. His intelligence is fine. But I'm going to pass him. He said, okay, doc. I said, because he needs a job with benefits. He's got 4 boys.
Sure.
And I think he's been a cop before. I'm not going to add to his depression.
Sure. Yeah.
By rejecting him. As a matter of fact, I think if I get him the job, it's going to be an antidepressant. The chief started laughing. So I recommended him for the job. He's still there.
Yeah.
So what I did is I applied the golden rule.
Makes sense.
Okay. I didn't go on my test data only.
Right.
I said, okay, if I'm in this circumstance, what's the best thing I can do for this man? He's
Yes.
still there. He's still there. It's 2 years ago. He had nothing wrong.
Right.
So when you're doing the golden rule, you got your fact, and you got other facts, and you got to take all into your decision making. And I thought, and so a lot of times when I deal with people who come to my office and we have problems, I say, how much is this present problem affecting how they are right in this moment?
Right.
If I change their environment, will that affect what? The way they're at.
Yes.
That's the golden rule.
Makes sense.
And so a lot of times in today, I didn't want to cause this man any more conflict than he already had. He's a dad with 4 boys.
Right. Yes.
Trying to do the best he can. Now, he didn't tell him that in the job interview. He's not gonna.
Right.
He's
'Cause
going
he
to put
wants
his
the
best
job.
foot forward, which
Yes.
anybody does. And so, and so a lot of times, when I get in things I do, I have to get his stuff to not going to tell in the job interview.
Right. Right.
All right. So, how are we doing? We still
We're good. We're good.
Anything else? So, bottom line is basically this: empathy versus sympathy. Empathy means the concept of judge the sin, not the sinner.
Sure.
Empathy means is your actions aren't appropriate, but I know why you did it. So I'm not judging you, I'm judging your actions. Sympathy is a little different. And sympathy is involved in the golden rule. But sympathy means I justified the way you acted,
Sure.
And I get why it is. So I'm accepting the action, I'm accepting you. Empathy was I accept you, but I don't accept the action.
Because I understand why that happened.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
So those are basically some issues with regard to managing conflict. You got the golden rule, which I think is one of the best ways to resolve conflict, but unfortunately not practiced a lot today.
Right.
A lot of times the golden rule, you don't even need laws.
Right.
Here's a good example. A guy named he studied tribes all over the world.
Okay.
And wrote a book called How Many Friends Do You Need?
Okay.
And he found out that tribes never got about 150
Oh.
all over the world. And he even saw the Native American tribes. And even right now, the Hutterites, which are up in the northwestern part of the United States, they call it a colony. And if a colony gets above 150, they subdivide.
Interesting.
And the reason they do that is to control behavior. Because once you get above 150, you get too many variables involved in who people are. But in a tribe 150, you know who the thief is.
Right. Right.
Because there's not that many people to deal with. And you got a lot more snitches. But you live in a big urban area, well, anybody can kind of hide out. So what he meant by that was it appears that when groups are small like that, the golden rule works every time. You don't have to have a bunch of rules.
Right.
You have to have a bunch of laws. But in a prison or any kind of will, where you got 300, 400, 500 people, you got to have rules, policies to control people's inappropriate behavior because there's so many people, it's very difficult to figure out who's doing it.
Right. Makes sense.
So that was based on a book called How Many Friends You Need.
Love
It's
it.
a wonderful book, and it gets you to think about, that's true. And even today, though, you got some of these tribes, they had tribes, colonies.
Right.
Hutterites are a good example, and they keep their colonies at 150. Now, an interesting thing is if you kept the prisoners at 150, think about the conflict you could resolve.
Absolutely.
You wouldn't have that many inmates to deal with, and you know what's going on, usually.
Right.
But if you get up to these maximum security joints of 500 or 600, 700 people, well, it's going to be difficult to manage people.
It is. It's interesting. So, looking at, we're about out of time on this one, but basically what I'm getting at is when we talk about conflict, it begins with me. If I think about resolving conflict, often I'm thinking about, well, that's you caused the conflict with me, so you're the cause.
That's right.
But I'm looking at these things, and we're talking about these things. This episode and the last one, it's all internal. It's my approach to the situation before I get to the conflict, quote unquote.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's why we spent the last two on causes of conflict and facts, because if you understand things like open-minded versus agreeableness, perception versus opinion versus facts, what we call ideology differences, etc., the golden rule, those are things you better understand. And let me give you an analogy. I'm no youngster. I'm 75 years old. I haven't had a major conflict in 25, 30 years about anything. I've been married for 50 years. Now I have disagreements with my wife.
Sure.
That's human. But really, other than her, I don't have conflicts anyway. And my conflicts are resolved within about 2 minutes. Interesting concept in that is there's a book called The 7 Principles of Highly Effective Marriages by a guy named John Gottman. And he claims that what you do, if you make a mistake, he calls it repair it immediately. So here's an analogy. If my gutter's leaking and I don't repair it, I got a bigger problem.
Right. Right.
If I have a gutter repair in my marriage I better fix, I better go repair it within 2 or 5 minutes.
Yes.
When it ain't leaking.
Right.
So if my wife and I have a conflict and I realize we've disagreed, I'll go back and say, you know what, let's talk about this.
Yes.
Other than that, I have conflicts with my kids, I have conflicts with my friends. And because a lot of things I'm saying you here, I'm aware of it.
Right.
And it minimizes it.
Yes.
And, and if I mess up with a friend, I apologize. But a lot of times you don't have to apologize because I don't mess up.
Right. Right. Yes.
But my wife, you're going to have that happen. And I guess what I'm trying to say is we're talking about managing conflict. But these 2 episodes we just done, you better know the causes
Yes.
so you don't fall in the trap
Yes.
of having a conflict.
Awesome.
And that's basically the way it has to be managed. And a lot of times it is like you said, it's within you.
Yeah.
It's how you perceive reality.
Yes. Yes. Awesome. Well, good deal. Well, hope, guys, that gave you some definitely some things to think about, be a little introspective, see how you approach things on a daily basis. We will be next week coming back, and we're going to spend a few more episodes with Dr. Sampson. We've talked about conflict and the facts behind them, but next we're going to look at some conflict management skills. So have your notepad ready, and we'll discuss those. But until next time, as always, stay sharp, stay safe, stay vigilant. Godspeed to each of you.